Welcome to another Education is Possible, a podcast that explores education's radical potential and the transformative work of scholars and teachers across the world. I'm your host, Y, and in today's episode, we're joined by Dr. Ahmed Junina, a Palestinian academic whose work and lived experience challenge dominant narratives about what education is meant to do and who is meant to serve. Speaking from the realities of displacement and the destruction of educational institutions in Gaza, Dr. Janina reflects on education not as a neutral system, but as a deeply political practice. This conversation moves beyond classrooms and curricula. We talk about education as a space of resistance, memory, and collective responsibility, especially in contexts where learning itself becomes an act of defiance.
Ahmed Junina, welcome to Another Education is Possible. How are you?
Thank you, Jordan. I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It is wonderful to have you on as a guest. So could you just get started by telling us a little bit about yourself, and particularly about yourself as it relates to your work and what we'll talk about today?
Sure. Thanks, Jordan. It's lovely to be with you today. My name is Ahmed Junina, and I am an assistant professor of applied linguistics. I also serve here as the head of the English department at Al-Aqsa University here in Gaza. So my role as an educator in Gaza has really been shaped, I could say, by my experiences over the past 2 years in Gaza. So I can say that role as an educator has increasingly been influenced by issues of emotional labor in teaching and learning, by issues of resilience in education, in higher education in particular. These issues really shaped my career over the past 2 years as I've been navigating teaching during wartime. But honestly, this was a shift in my probably areas of research and focus. And this shift in my direction in teaching and research wasn't really planned. That the circumstances that we all found ourselves in as academics and students in Gaza probably forced us to encounter questions that we couldn't just ignore. I mean, you are in the middle of genocidal war, and you are teaching and learning and researching. But this makes you ask questions that don't have really to relate your background, education, or at least your background or immediate kind of research interest. Then you start asking questions like, what does it mean to teach while you're being starved? What does it mean to study and continue learning as a student while being starved, while being displaced away from home, while being in the middle of all that loss and waiting and uncertainty and fear? So I can say that I've been trying to systematically document all these experiences in my research recently, focusing on issues of resilient pedagogy and emotional labor, as I said, and trying to probably show the world that these are stories and experiences not only of loss and destruction that we all read and hear about, but also stories and experiences of resilience, of adaptation, of creativity among students and academics as well.
So a lot of that work that you talked about deals with this term that has become pretty familiar to, I'm sure, most of our listeners, Scholasticide. And when Kamal initially used that term, it really captured the way that the Zionist entity was systematically and intentionally destroying educational institutions, targeting Palestinian educators, destroying everything about education in Palestine. But this was also 15 years ago. And your work critically engages this idea as, in the wake of the genocide. So could you speak a little bit more about what it looks like for yourself on the ground, for educators, for students, and how you're maybe responding to this notion of scholasticide?
I think, Jordan, you highlighted a very important part of the issue here when you said 15 years ago, when Kamal coined the term or introduced the term 15 years ago, probably in 2008, war on Gaza, then this is a very important to keep in mind when studying, when exploring, when investigating, when navigating issues related to scholasticide as a term, because we're talking about 2008 and then 2023 to 2025. That's a very important issue. I'll come back to that point. As we said, scholasticide has been really defined as that systematic and deliberate destruction of people's educational institutions, infrastructure, targeting academics and students, not only from that perspective of destroying campuses and buildings, but extending to targeting that human capital, that intellectual capacities of a community, of a nation. And honestly, this is exactly what we've seen in Gaza over the past 2 years. We've seen destruction of campuses, physical destruction of campuses, erasing, leveling, and wiping out campuses. And one of those campuses was my workplace, my university, Al-Aqsa University in Gaza, which has been leveled to the ground in Gaza campus. So this is what we've really witnessed and seen. Killing academics, targeting academics, many of them with their family members. And it was targeted killing. It wasn't kind of collateral damage. It was targeted killing of academics. It seemed that it was a way or an attempt of silencing those voices and kind of erasing knowledge producers or people who contribute to the liberatory knowledge of their community. But as I said, Jordan, when we talk about a concept or a term that was coined 15 years ago, I suppose, and I really claim here, that it was introduced in a totally different territory, in a totally different scenario. When we talk about 2008 war on Gaza, and we talk about this genocidal war on Gaza 2023, 2025, which is ongoing, and we can talk about this if you want, which is ongoing, it hasn't stopped. We are talking about two different wars. Equaling those, making them equal, probably is really understatement, and it doesn't do justice to the sacrifices and the experiences people have experienced in Gaza of the past year. That's why I feel the term is accurate, describes what we've seen, but probably it is incomplete because it really misses some kind of aspects of that silent war on knowledge. It is unseen. Honestly, it is silent. And kind of the forms of that silent war on knowledge really featured in this particular war over the past 2 years. If we've seen it as academics and students. When I say the silent war on knowledge, there was an attempt to probably ease any attempts of knowledge building processes or attempts to encourage students and academics and scholars to build knowledge building processes. For example, Jordan, we tried to have this conversation a few weeks ago. And the first time I couldn't join the call because there was an immediate internet blackout over the whole Gaza Strip. Immediate. And I wasn't able even to reach you to say that I couldn't join the call because this was happening. Now, this is not targeting a campus. This is not killing an academic, but it is an attempt of attacking any ways of spreading words or producing knowledge. It is a form that we are talking. This conversation is a form of producing and sharing knowledge, right? So any attempt that counterattacks, any attempt that blocks our conversation, it is targeting that knowledge production processes. So I don't think scholasticide as a term probably covers this form that really emerges in particular during this particular war. And then we had to reschedule the call, Jordan. It was unfortunate. And then the second time we couldn't make the call as well because of the same exactly, the very same reason, immediate blackout, internet blackout over the Gaza Strip. And I don't think scholasticide talks about this because of the reasons I talked about, because of the time difference and when it was introduced. So these are issues that really we academics, students, journalists struggle with when we try to share knowledge and produce knowledge in the context of Gaza.
Yeah, you're really hitting on it here. And I know that this is early on in your research, and certainly we can cut this if you want, but would you feel comfortable sharing the term that you're playing with? I know we talked about that before.
Yeah, and that's why when we talk about those attempts of tracing any attempts or chasing or forcefully lashing any attempts of making efforts towards knowledge production and knowledge building processes, you feel that you are stuck. You are faced with those difficulties and circumstances. That's why I felt that scholasticide is accurate, but there probably needs to be a continuation to the term to reflect what we've been experiencing over the past 2 years. That's why I proposed in a recent research project that I'm still working on a new term that I call no lash, which stands for like the first part of knowledge, or know as a verb, and the suffix lash, which means lashing something like by force, attacking, lashing that attempt or effort to produce knowledge, to make knowledge building processes and flourish those processes among students and scholars. That's why no lash is seen as that systematic and deliberate attempt to target not only the destruction of campuses and killing academics, that's fine, and that's there, it's already there, but also that silent war on knowledge building processes that is really hidden when attacking internet cafes and killing people inside internet cafes where people connect to the word, share narratives, and spread word, their messages, which includes journalists, reporters, academics, and students. I've seen cases of students who were in these public places like internet cafes, that's where I'm joining you from today, where they come to complete a quiz or complete an exam online, or a reporter who comes to send a report, or a journalist who comes to do an interview. I've done several interviews with media platforms from this particular place, and there was no other option. And when this is targeted, it feels that, okay, what I'm doing is probably attacked. It is risky for me and for my immediate environment. That's why it may cause some fear among people. That's why I feel it was really silent war.
And such a powerful concept that builds and engages Scholasticide. And you're a true linguist. That's the double use of both of those words. I love the way you use lash, which in English can both mean to bind and hold down, kind of restrain, but also has this very disciplinary idea of punishment and kind of teaching in a repressive way. But I'm occupying too much time. You just have very exciting ideas. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-host and try to step back here.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. I actually have one question. I would like you to walk us through a day of teaching your online classes amid displacement and the continuous power cuts. How did you sustain teaching during bombardment and such circumstances?
Well, you take me back to July 2024, when all that started. I mean, the decision to resume teaching during the war. It was in July 2024 when the university decided that this seems to be a long disruption to teaching. It doesn't seem to be a very short disruption, just like previous wars. And the decision was made that, okay, we'll resume teaching mid-July 2024. When this was communicated to us as academics first, so many people were skeptical about the approach. Like, I mean, we were moving from one place to another. We were displaced. We were after very basic needs of daily survival. Bombardment was in the background. It was the norm. Losing loved ones was in the background. It was occupying all of us. It was the daily norm. Death was everywhere. And then you receive that note that just get ready because we want to resume and see how it goes. Well, it was communicated to us as first through the deanships of the university and then to the heads of departments. And as a head of the English department, I was like, I am in the north of Gaza. And when I say the north of Gaza, probably it's just a bit of background to our listeners that the north of Gaza experienced so much unimaginable damage, destruction, challenges, so many challenges. And we'll be talking about those in a minute. It doesn't mean that the south of Gaza was living a luxurious life, was really equally dangerous, but the pressure was on the north of Gaza, so that people moved to the south. And evacuation orders were non-stop to the south, to the north of Gaza in order to move to the south. Well, my family and I decided not to move. We stayed from day one to last day of the war in our home in the north of Gaza. So that was a risky decision, but we made the decision because we felt that there was no safe place to go. All places were equally dangerous. And it was a propaganda that this is a humanitarian zone and there is a safe zone, go and you will find food. And we knew that people are being killed there. And they are being killed here. So it's equally dangerous. We're staying. So we made that collective decision that we either live together or die together. So let's stay in the same place and see how it goes. And in the midst of this, you intend to resume teaching. Now, first of all, we are talking about a time when there was no internet connection, when there was no electricity still. There is no electricity, and I'll show you how we get access to internet and electricity. So as a head of the department, I said, okay, that's going to be my responsibility to see how I can secure at least connection so that I get hold of people who can teach the courses we want to offer first. at least a connection, make the connection, reach the students, reach the staff. Most of the staff, if not all, were displaced, were living in tents, in shelters. Some of them were displaced outside Gaza. So what I did was I had to adapt and find a way. And then I found out that solar panels could help with this. Most of the solar panels in Gaza were damaged because of the bombardment. But then there was the other issue of, okay, you have some solar panels which are damaged in order to probably produce some kind of power supply. They are damaged, but they still produce that power that you may need. You may need. Then I had my vehicle battery. My vehicle was like there, not moving from the beginning of the war, so there was no need for the battery. Then I found a way that, okay, that combination of two solar panels, damaged solar panels with my vehicle battery, I can plug the vehicle battery to those solar panels and charge, and then using the battery to run the modem and see if internet connection works. And then I found out a particular region where there was internet connection, and it was unique that this particular region had internet connection. So I had to charge my vehicle battery and go to that particular region in order to plug the modem and connect to the internet and probably contact colleagues who want to volunteer and teach first to see who would like to teach. So the first contact was with teachers who were outside Gaza. Hopefully they could help, and they did help. Thank you so much to all of them. And then I reached out to volunteers, to colleagues from around the world, from Oman, from Egypt, from Canada, from Ireland, from different parts of the world. I reached out and they offered their time and expertise really generously. So that was the first attempt of, okay, let's put that effort together, see if it works, secure a few staff members who can offer these courses, and then reach out to students and see if they can enroll in courses. It was really a success story, I believe, because we depended on really low bandwidth platforms like WhatsApp groups. We started with creating WhatsApp groups, Telegram channels, because honestly, like using Zoom or Google Meet or other platforms that require really steady and stable internet connection wasn't possible. Like not even for like lecturers, let alone for students who were in tents. Many of the students were using those like hourly voucher, internet vouchers that's hourly that you can buy. And it's really, really weak signal that provides weak signal that can barely connect you to WhatsApp or Telegram. So we started with those WhatsApp groups, communicating with our students, sending voice notes, sending very short or compressed, really small sections of PDF files. And in the background, there was that sound of, and I can, from time to time, I visit that particular WhatsApp group, which we created for that particular course that I'm talking about. It was a semantics course in July 2024. And then when I go back and listen to those voice notes, it reminds me of the time that we had really tricky time, ambulance sirens in the background, the hovering and the buzzing of drones in the background, bombardment in the background from time to time. In the voice notes I sent, and in the voice notes my students sent. But this reflected that resilience of students and educators who decided not to be silenced, who decided to try and see how it works, to continue their learning path in the very difficult circumstances, really unimaginable circumstances. And these are logistical and technical challenges that I was talking about. But there were more painful experiences that were in the background. I mean, the emotional weight that comes with losing loved ones. Yet you have to continue. I myself lost 43 members of my extended family during the war. And during that time, I received the sad news of loved ones, of my nephews, of my sister, of my niece who was killed, who was crushed under the ceiling of her apartment, of my brother-in-law who was killed while he was working in the ambulance department, serving his community. So when you receive that sad news in the middle of a war, while you are also not safe, your family is not safe, but you are required to continue your, not because of any other responsibility, but because of your ethical responsibility towards that responsibility of continuity of students' journey, of students' learning. So that was really overwhelming. Honestly, it was really challenging to feel the loss of loved ones, to feel insecure. At the same time, you go to the funeral of a loved one, you come back to teaching. You come back not as to act as if there was nothing, but to refuse to be silenced and to feel that, okay, I want to continue because I want to bear witness. I want to help my students continue on this path of learning and education. So yeah, it wasn't easy, honestly, and it continues to be challenging. But with like this particular place of internet hub or public places that provide internet connectivity and charging devices or power supply, it gets somehow easier for students or for academics in Gaza. But again, these places are, as I said, public places, and they are risky, they are dangerous, as I mentioned earlier.
I also have another question. You connect resilience theory with the Palestinian concept of sumud. How do you see these shaping the new students and teachers who keep learning under siege? And what is educational sumud, or maybe a pedagogy of sumud? And what did your students teach you about resilience?
I think this is a very important question, and thanks for asking and raising this issue of that connection between educational sumud and the term sumud in our Palestinian context and resilience. When I started working with resilience theory and the frames that are connected to resilience theory, I noticed that it shapes resilience as a kind of an individual psychological trait. There are issues with institutional and societal resilience levels, but mainly most of the literature talks about resilience as that individual psychological trait, which refers to the ability to adapt, to cope, to bounce back. We in the Palestinian context have something really deeper and maybe older, which is the concept of sumud, which means steadfastness in English. And that concept of sumud in the Palestinian context refers to that attempt of really remaining rooted in your whatever, in your homeland, in your learning, in teaching. Remain rooted when really the environment that surrounds you is nothing but attempts of uprooting you. I felt that when you decide to teach during the war on Gaza, in the north of Gaza, it feels that this is a form of sumud. It's shown by students and academics because you are deciding to stay rooted while everything around you is really systematically designed in a way that violently tries to uproot you. So I felt, wow, well, that is educational sumud, and that's how we can probably perceive it. It's a way of learning and teaching, of course, that really insists on continuity, on remaining when really continuity and attempts to remain disrupted. And by the way, this form of educational sumud is really manifested in very small acts. Sometimes, like when a student joins a class online from a tent using that internet voucher I mentioned. This is a form of educational sumud. When students submit assignments respecting a deadline, this is seen as a form of educational sumud. Amidst unimaginable, horrific circumstances, students submit assignments respecting deadlines and sometimes asking for extension. That's fine. This is a form of educational sumud that I was talking about. And when students, for example, despite all that immense damage and loss we've all experienced in Gaza, a group of wonderful students decide to arrange and organize a graduation ceremony. This is a form of educational sumud. It sends a message that you can destroy our campus, but you can't destroy that determination that we want to continue. We are here and we cannot be silenced. Even if the university is destroyed, at the end of the day, it's destructive. What matters most is that intellectual ability, is that human capital, is that, I should say, when I talk to my students in classes and when I send voice notes, I always start with affirming how important their role is in now and in the future, in the reconstruction process. And that's why I feel that their role goes beyond just attending a class or completing an assignment or finishing a course or getting a degree certificate. That's what I mean by saying they are the future. So they really taught me so much about resilience, taught me that this meaning of resilience is not just being probably unaffected or just staying calm. No, different occasions, my students cried during the course and many of them disappeared for some time. And I lost contact with them. But when they came back, they brought with them stories that no one should ever experience in life. When a student sends a message saying, "Hello, everyone, I miraculously survived a bombardment. My father was injured and I miraculously survived. I don't know if my father is still alive, but he was injured. The last thing I saw that he was injured, but he was taken by people, by neighbors, our neighborhood. They took him to the hospital. I don't know if he's suffering. And we started just calming her down and telling her that he should be fine. Don't worry. We pray for you. He will be fine. That sense of community was there. They taught me that it doesn't have to be, resilience doesn't have to be that we all have to be calm and unaffected. So the connection between that resilience and educational sumud and that pedagogy of sumud that you referred to, I think Western theories describe what resilience means at the individual level, as I said, but also that concept of sumud really explains how a whole people altogether keeps learning alive in the face of genocide, in the face of targeted.
I wonder if you could dig into this a bit more. And my apologies to both of you because I am going to butcher words in Arabic. I should have asked the question on Samud, which I say regularly. So could you talk a bit about the potential tensions between this notion of education as a form of resistance and what's happening in formalized education? Because I think about this in my own context, and a lot of the work is about interrupting schooling. And schooling is often a complicated and difficult process, but it's one that can be very repressive. All of this to say that I spend a lot of my own activism and professional career pushing against the rigid structures of school as an institution. And yet I was so moved when I saw recently students getting their Tawjihi results, and to think about, well, that's a very rigid standardized exam, and why is that so moving to see this? And yet it is. That's a bit all over the place, but hopefully it gives you enough to grapple with.
Well, I think this is a fair point to make, Jordan. Honestly, I used to push against all those rigid, institutionalized, standardized, you could say, assessments or forms of schooling, etc. And I really, really deeply feel about what you're talking about. I really relate here because that tension is there. But I've been really engaged recently with critical pedagogy, the works of both Ivan Illich and others, like who really critique, and I seem to support their ideas because really it makes a lot of sense, in particular, probably in the Arab world context. So they critique those forms of schooling and learning that seem to reproduce hierarchy, that seem to reproduce control. Like instead of liberating minds, they seem to reproduce, that control and hierarchy. And this applies honestly to many systems, education systems in the Arab world. And that was part of my PhD study, that I studied how those education systems depend too much mostly on rote learning and dictating and probably spoon feeding, and so that was problematic. But in Gaza, when you refer to that particular point, Jordan, when you refer to Tawjihi exams and how people were reacting and celebrating Tawjihi results over the past few weeks, I feel that meaning of education and that meaning of rigidness really shifts in here. It makes that tension really theoretical, really philosophical. Instead of education as liberation, it becomes education as, reproducing, etc. Yeah, that tension is there. But in this particular context, I see it as this. I see it as the students were not celebrating the system or the school or the exam itself. They were really celebrating their achievement. They were celebrating overcoming the challenges, because I personally felt it. I had two of my nephews in my home where I live who did Tawjihi and completed Tawjihi during those two past years. One was born in 2006 and they did it a few months ago. And then the other one was born 2007 and he paradoxically sat for the exam a few weeks later, the other nephew. So it means that they did it probably in close time, same period of time. And the extremely difficult circumstances of internet connectivity, of loss, of waiting, of hunger, of starvation. But they did it. And when they received the good news that they passed, I got emotional. I felt happy because it was a message that we were celebrating life. Our excitement was about life, about triumph over darkness that we've experienced and we continue to. So the excitement is not about the system. The excitement and the happiness and the joy and the celebration was an attempt to counterattack, to resist against those attempts of erasure and no lash that I was talking about. So I can see it as a resisting no lash, resisting scholasticide. I mean, in that particular context, yeah, it feels like, wow, like formal schooling might be restrictive, might be problematic, but here in this Gazan context, it is important because it preserves our continuity. It preserves our identity. It plays a role. My little nephews started going back to school recently after the ceasefire, and then I asked my brother and I said, "How is it going? Do they get any benefit when they go back? When they go to school like 3 days a week and for a few hours?" And he said a very philosophical answer. He said, it's not about content that they receive. It's about going back to that discipline. It is going back to continuity. It is going back to responsibility, the feeling of responsibility. When they wake up in the morning, they have to wear uniform. They have to make sure that their bag is ready, that they did their homework. That is important. It's not about content. And I agree with that. And that is the importance of formal schooling in this particular time and in this particular context. So it preserves that continuity and really identity of students and their families, their parents.
I would like you to tell us more about how or what can global educators or policymakers take from Gaza's example about sustaining learning during a crisis.
I think, honestly, I've been asked this question several times, probably in different forms. Sometimes people ask us as educators, and personally, I was asked this question, why do you continue doing this? What drives you to continue teaching? And what drives you to continue initiating for your students? And I always said that it was that the feeling of ethical responsibility towards my students. So if we are to learn lessons from the experience of Gaza over the past 2 years, I think educators are encouraged to look at the issue from that lens of Gaza, that meaningful learning and meaningful teaching doesn't really depend on perfect structures, perfect campuses, perfect classrooms, perfect theaters. It doesn't really depend on that. It doesn't depend on perfect atmosphere, well-conditioned, air-conditioned lectures, or like the latest technology. It really depends on that feeling of responsibility, that feeling of that relationship between learners and academics, that flexibility that I talked about, that adaptation, that trust. I mean, when we build trust with our students, when we share our struggle with them, I think this is much more important than many other like logistical or technical or material considerations in the teaching process. I always call and emphasize humanizing the career, humanizing the teaching process, because what matters most is the human, is the student, is the educator. Any other considerations come later. And that experience of Gaza over the past 2 years proved to work, at least from that's what we've seen from research that we conducted and academic conducted in Gaza, and many academics around the world conducted about what is happening in Gaza and how educators and students sustain teaching and learning. Really high levels of resilience and sumud emerged during the past 2 years. So I think education systems, policymakers, educators really need to plan for crisis. They need to take this into consideration, that crisis may happen anytime. And COVID was a rehearsal for crisis, but there are other forms of crisis. And what we've seen in Gaza is an extreme example or extreme form of that crisis. Probably crisis is an understatement, but I mean, yeah, I mean, there should be planning and preparation for these forms of crisis by probably decentralizing learning, by adopting different forms of assessments that prioritize humanity over bureaucracy. I mean, in my class, I always told my students, don't worry. Please don't worry. When you join a class using your smartphone, because my research shows that 92% of my students join the course using their smartphones, which is really challenging, which is really exhausting. And 89% of them used smartphone that they shared with other family members, with their siblings. So this means that assessments need to really prioritize humanity over bureaucracy. That's why I told them, don't worry about assessments. Please don't worry about typing a perfect assignment. Just if you can write your assignment handwritten, take a photograph, write your name on top, Send the photograph in the group or privately to me on WhatsApp. That's it. It doesn't have to be perfect and typed. And I know they won't be able to find a laptop or access a laptop or type an assignment. And well, this is a small example, but it means a lot in the context of crisis. It makes a big difference in how students approach their learning. And the other thing that educators need to take into account when dealing with crisis, the principles of trauma-informed education and trauma-informed pedagogy. When we talk about safety, when we talk about security, when we talk about empowerment, when we talk about trustworthiness, these are issues that need to be lived reality, not only theory, need to be practiced. I know we can't provide safety to our students, but at least when you create a WhatsApp group telling the students you don't have to go to a public place that is dangerous in order to connect, joining a Zoom call, you can just join this WhatsApp group. And whenever you are able to send a message, you can do that. This is one form of providing at least safety for students. When you share with them that, don't worry, it's not a stigma that you don't have internet access. It is not a stigma that you don't have a laptop. I myself use my vehicle battery and plug it into 2 damaged solar panels. This is one form of adaptation I made. So I share this story, personal story, with my students to build that trust that I talked about and to build that trustworthiness, which is one principle, one important principle of trauma-informed pedagogy.
Not to treat Gaza as a lesson for others, not to equate things, but there are such salient lessons in there for any teacher to teach with compassion, to understand student experiences and your own experiences and be adaptable, responsive, flexible. Yeah, I mean, to the question that was asked, it's there is educational life in Gaza that I think we should reckon with on its own terms, but it's just such a powerful notion of what teachers do and can do against and beyond these kind of bureaucratic structures, and certainly in the face of relentless genocide. I am going to do something that most guests feel a little uncomfortable with, but I'm going to quote you to you. So you have a piece in The Guardian where you say, "Too hungry to think, too weak to sit upright, concentration slips away. The struggle to stay focused as an academic in Gaza. To generate knowledge in the context of hunger is to think through pain, to teach students who have not eaten and still tell them their voices matter, to insist against all odds that Gaza still thinks, still questions, still creates." Do you have any examples that could help us think with this idea, with this piece?
Thanks, Jordan, for quoting that piece. You take me back to August this year when I wrote this piece, and it was published in The Guardian. But honestly, that was a very difficult time, not only for me, but for all the people in Gaza. I mean, I talked about it not because I wanted to document my own story, my personal story, my personal struggle with hunger, but I felt that was a collective story. It was a collective struggle. I saw it. I witnessed how people were struggling. I saw people collapse in front of me because of hunger. I saw that woman who collapsed, and people rushed to rescue her, but they found nothing to give it to her. There was that supplement, peanut butter supplement, that is given to people in famine zones. And one of the people who was there, one person who was there, gave that woman that supplement, sachet of peanut butter, and then they squeeze it and give it to the person. It gives you kind of some nutrition so that you don't lose balance. It was really sad to see those examples of stories of starvation in 2025. And then when I saw those moments and experienced them, and this was like after a year of teaching, working and researching and holding webinars and attending conferences, and amid all that tricky situation, and then you find yourself in a situation where you and the people around you can't find the basic needs of daily survival. And I didn't feel it was shameful, because it wasn't a personal failure. It wasn't a collective failure either. I felt that it was designed, it was systematic, it was a form of erasure. That's why I still remember that particular day of initiating and starting to write the first sentence of that particular piece, when I said, I must admit that I'm writing this piece while I'm starving. And I still remember that moment of writing that piece while feeling hungry. And for those those who listen to us, it wasn't. And if you read the piece, it explains the situation, but it wasn't an eat. There was nothing to buy, literally. This is not metaphorical. This was literal. In the literal sense, there was nothing to buy. There was no food. So feeling that it wasn't my own personal story, I decided to document it and write about it. So during that time, I started to feel that, well, my body seems to, I was struggling to stay focused. Like my eyes were blurry. My vision like felt like, oh, I can't write an email. I can't respond to a message. And there was that training I was doing for a group of students in Gaza on storytelling. Then in the group, I sent a message. In the morning, I sent a message to the students saying that, good morning, guys. Look, I will be honest. I am dizzy. And I'm writing this message to you all, and I feel dizzy. Honestly, I would stand up, and then I feel that I would collapse. I feel dizzy. Not only me. People were telling me the same thing. So I said, are you okay if we postpone today's session and we can probably resume later? Because I was exhausted. I was mentally and physically exhausted. And the students said, yeah, that's fine. I said, okay, I'll make a poll and see we can vote. If you want to postpone the session until further notice, or if you want to do it. If you want to do it, we'll see how we'll find a way. And then most of the people who were able to access the group and vote said, yes, we want to postpone. And then they sent messages after that saying that we feel the same. And I told them, I'm telling you the same. I'm telling you that I feel dizzy. And I don't feel ashamed. I don't feel embarrassed to tell you this. Because it's not my fault. It's not your fault. It's no one's fault. It's no one's fault except those who designed this system of starvation and famine. So they said, yes, we want to postpone and please give us some time. We need some time. So yeah, let's go for it. We'll postpone until further notice. And that particular student who replied, and he is a student with visual impairment, I know, a dear student, I know. He's a student with a visual impairment. And he wrote back, said, yes, please, let's postpone because it's afternoon. And I have been looking for a loaf of bread since the early morning and I couldn't find. That particular message stays with me. And I read it as a reminder that what we are all doing matters, and that continuity that we sustain and we keep doing, and that momentum that we try to give to our students and to the education process in Gaza matters. And teaching those students storytelling matters, and their voices matter, and continuity matters, and documenting this experience and sharing it with the world matters. I didn't see that message by that particular student as failure or complaining from him or as if he was seeking empathy from us or from me as a trainer. No. I felt it was a way of saying that even if our bodies get weaker, but our spirits will resist and we will sustain. We will try our best. We will, even if we do not fully recover from this, we will continue doing what we are doing. We will continue writing. We will continue documenting. We will continue researching. We will continue teaching. We will continue living. Because if we keep doing this, I think this is one way of resisting no-lash, resisting scholasticide, resisting genocide, resisting occupation, resisting any attempts of erasure and silencing Palestinian voices. So this was one form of, I suppose, one form of sumud that was exemplified by the students during that particular time. And their decision not to surrender, not to quit, not to stop, made me continue what I was doing, continue doing what I was doing, continue writing, continue researching. So it was really a very difficult time, but here we are, sharing our voices with the world.
I think there's nothing more powerful. That's such a great way of framing the everyday way that this played out. And we want to close with something similar, which is also a quote, both from your students and from you. So the two of us came across this beautiful video of a graduation, and you were asked to be a speaker there. And the student said to you, "A true teacher knows no boundaries of place and no constraints of war." And then you responded to all of the students, to all of the families, "You will rebuild what has been destroyed." And you spoke about the ways that people resist, and educational life in Gaza continues. And I wonder with that quote where education comes into the mix with this in the role of rebuilding what has been destroyed. What role does education play?
Thank you, Jordan. Yeah, there was a wonderful moment I recall, and it was one form of educational sumud. As I said, I referred to a group of students organizing by themselves, volunteer, sharing the time, sharing the effort to produce this fantastic form of educational sumud of sending a message that despite the destruction that took place in our university, our own university, Al-Aqsa University in Gaza, we still have dreams to continue to send the message to the world that we are here and we will stay here. So when the student said that particular statement, I honestly, I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed. I mean, it was an emotional moment, but I didn't take it as a praise of me or a praise of my effort, but rather I felt the student wanted to or tried to give a description of what we all as a family were doing during the war to probably hold education together, to hold these pieces together so that we reached that particular point of time where students graduated with their degrees. So the student, by saying that, really, she captured that spirit of our relationship during the war, that well, we are disconnected from each other. We are away from each other geographically, physically, but we are together. We are for each other. We stand by each other. We support each other. We feel for each other. Yeah, I mean, our university collapsed, but that relationship didn't collapse, but rather we adapted. We continued that communication. We adapted to what was going on. I honestly feel the students and their families, because honestly, it was overwhelming, as I said, hearing what the families came to say to me when we met on that day. The students, they came to say, so I felt it seems that they saw the effort, and I believe it. They saw the effort and the struggle because they shared that struggle. They were part of it. They were doing the same thing. It was challenging to attend a class because they knew how it felt. They appreciated the effort because they were doing the same thing. They were exerting the same effort. When I went to see the students in this graduation ceremony, I had really mixed emotions. I was eager to see the faces and to connect the faces and the names of the students who were texting me in the group. And they were saying that I lost my brother, I lost a father, and those students who disappeared from the group, who had not contacted for a long time. And so I wanted to see, honestly, who's still there and whom we had lost. It was really overwhelming to see the faces with the joy and happiness and the sense of achievement. So in a word, I feel that teaching in a war is not just about heroism, or we are trying to romanticize what we've been doing. It's not about that, but it's about that feeling of responsibility, the feeling that whatever you contribute to your career in this particular time, in this unprecedented time, makes a big difference when it comes to continuity, adaptability, and supporting the students. And when I said to the students that we believe in you, we believe that you will be the ones who will rebuild, I really meant it. Literally, I meant it. Because think about it this way. I mean, when a structure is collapsed, we will need engineers to design how the structure will be rebuilt. We need that intellectual vision that, okay, the building will be this and here and that and etc. So education is really the backbone of recovery. It's the backbone of reconstruction process. It's that important element that plants hope among people. I mean, if you have a home, if you have a building, if you have a structure, but you don't have the vision or the hope that there will be a family that will live inside that house. It's knowledge and education that makes that house home, that structure home. The feeling that this is a comfort zone, the feeling that this is your own comfort zone or a family's comfort zone. So that's why we feel that the students who will be the engineers of the future, the doctors of the future, the accountants of the future, the journalists of the future. They will rebuild what has really been destroyed during the war. So we believe in them, and we encourage them. We stand by them, and we'll be there for them. Because if they continue to rise, I believe that Gaza will rise again. And that's what we hope.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed, for sharing, for giving us this time, for talking about your knowledge and your lived experience with us today. Everything you spoke about, like from scholasticide to teaching during displacement to the, and also to the everyday realities of learning under siege and bombardment. All of this helps us understand that education in Gaza, like it's not about a system of school, but it's about, it's an act of resistance. It's a form of dignity. It's a way on insisting us, telling the world that we do exist and we do matter and we do have a voice. And I want to close by returning to the words we discussed from your piece, where you say, to generate knowledge in the context of hunger is to think through pain. What you shared with us today shows us that Gaza still thinks, Gaza still teaches, and still imagines a future, and that teachers are at the center of that like ongoing struggle. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Jordan, for the opportunity, for the platform. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you so much for the time.
Today's episode was produced by all of us in the Education, Genocide, Liberation class. If you like our podcast, please like, rate, follow, subscribe, comment, do all the things. You can also find us on Instagram, where Another Ed is possible. We'll be promoting some of Ahmed's work there. Thanks as always for listening. We'll be back soon with a new episode of Another Education is Possible.